Hello and welcome. It's a new Wednesday, which means a new graphic novel review by me, Andrew Ace. You can find me online, especially Twitter and Instagram, at UYS999. That's how you spell my pronounced Ace last name. So, this week I'm going to be reviewing Before Watchmen. Now, I'm a big fan of the original series. I'll just throw down a little geek cred here. The Absolute Watchmen is really the way to read it if you can. This is the original series by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons that came out in the 80s and was a major groundbreaking change to the comic book industry. In part because it treated the heroes like real people, and in part was maybe the beginning of the darker, grittier comic books that predominated were prevalent in the industry in the late 80s and early 90s. Get that back in. And I also enjoyed the movie. I mean, I have a few criticisms, but I don't think they're nearly as harsh as a lot of the other ones out there that I have heard. And when the movie came out, I definitely went all out picking up Film Companion and Art of the Film. And while, you know, the movie isn't 100% accurate, I did enjoy the special effects. I think that there's definitely quite a task to try and bring the Watchmen world to the silver screen, and Zack Snyder did a good job with that. I also have Dave Gibbons' book, Watching the Watchmen, that details the art process of creating the original work. And I know that there was a fair bit of controversy regarding the Before Watchmen series when they were announced, because Alan Moore had been an outspoken critic of the movie and of continuing the world. For him, it was a done story, but of course, that was a story for hire for DC Comics. They owned the characters, the rights, yada yada. And I can understand, given the massive success of the series, that they would want to, well, capitalize on that. I'm also noticing over here my original copy, which, is beautiful, but you compare the size of those pages to this bad boy again. That'll quite hit the right for comparison, but the Absolute editions, if you love a graphic novel, are always a great investment. So, the Before Watchmen graphic novels. Now, there's different ways of reading them based on either their original publication date, trying to follow a chronological order, and to be honest, for whatever I did look up, I gotta say that the stories jumped around. I think it was publication-based reading order that I found, really actually wasn't the best. I would just suggest pick up any of them and enjoy it. They're all essentially standalone stories. They all build on or build up to the Watchmen graphic novel by Alan Moore, and at the same time, they really develop the characters in unique ways. I had a couple criticisms. I'm trying to look around for which one to start with, so I'm going to go here actually. Minutemen and Silk Spectre. When I looked up online the best reading order, it said to start with Minutemen, and then I of course had to double back to this graphic novel to read the Silk Spectre storyline. Now, Minutemen, written and illustrated by Darwyn Cooke, who is one of my, one of my favorite artists. I don't really like to negative net or bash comic book creators. I might have a few criticisms, saying I love something, but here's where maybe subjectively I differ. But Darwyn Cooke is a phenomenal creator who's worked on a number of great works, DC The New Frontier being one that leaps to mind. And it is his retro 50-esque style, 50s-esque style, that I think works incredibly well for the Minutemen series here. And what it does is it tries to just, relate the build-up, the backstory of the 1930s and 1940s costumed heroes that they went on to inspire the next generation that are the characters we know in Watchmen. And obviously you've met a number of these characters when reading the Watchmen, because it itself is filled with news clips, flashbacks, recountings that build up the past. And that's what makes the Watchmen world so interesting. It really feels like a real world. You've got what's happened in the 30s, the 40s. It all builds into then the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And at each step, something goes slightly different from our own world, whereby, by the time you have Alan Moore's work, you have a Nixon for his third term in office, the Vietnam War being won by America, and we'll come back to that. And it creates a great alternate Earth. So, the Minutemen series, great read. I love everything Darwyn Cooke does. And I would say, of all of them, I think I might have enjoyed this one the most. It really sheds great backstory on characters that you'd sort of only gotten a bit of a tasting of in the original Watchmen work. Now, just to then skip along and talk about Silk Spectre, and this is just a smaller 4-issue series that looks at Silk Spectre 2, so the daughter of the original Silk Spectre, and her sort of becoming a hero, her first adventure, her coming-of-age story, where she runs away from home and gets mixed up in the psychedelic San Francisco and the adventures that then ensue. Also a story of young love. Now, this is also written by Darwyn Cooke and Amanda Conner, and then illustrated by Amanda Conner, and she does phenomenal work. I would say there's a hint of cheesecake to her style. She certainly draws very beautiful women, but I think beyond that, she does incredibly expressive faces. She provides a powerful impact to the art without it being maybe Jay Lee's, flashy kind of distorted arms and bodies, which I spoke about in one of my previous reviews and say that wasn't quite for me. For Amanda Conner, she takes what I call a cleaner, simpler line style, combines it with rich, powerful coloring, and it's very evocative, a lot of fun to read. So, that's the first graphic novel of Before Watchmen, containing Minutemen and Silk Spectre. And as I was saying, this really, I think, was my favorite read of the Before Watchmen books, given the creators involved and how well the stories were told. So, another one is Ozymandias. I'm going to hopefully not mispronouncing that, but I might be. And the Crimson Corsair. And the backup feature, which I'm just going to talk about first, the Crimson Corsair, is another pirate tale. And the Watchmen was always very famous for having a story within a story of this sailor who's shipwrecked. And this is, again, sort of the prelude to that, where we discover, how the scene was sort of set right before when we came in The Watchmen. So, of course, in The Watchmen is a comic book that's being read by a character in the world because superhero comics are no longer popular. I kind of like that. There's also a backup feature in here about Dollar Bill, which is neat. But the main story is about Ozymandias, who is and I don't want to spoil or anything, but principal villain, hero, conflicted hero of the Watchmen series. The one who basically sets about to destroy millions of lives, to save billions of lives by faking, in the books, an alien invasion. In the case of the movie, that Dr. Manhattan's gone crazy and is blowing everything up. And it is his murder of the comedian at the start of The Watchmen that sets the whole story in motion, as Rorschach and the other characters attempt to unravel the comedian's death, and that then leads them to Ozymandias' plan to try and save the Earth. He's a great villain because you really understand why he's doing it, but at the same time, he's smart enough, he's supposed to be the world's smartest man, pretentious enough, rich enough, that you kind of dislike him. Just, he's kind of like a more a-hole Bruce Wayne, but at the same time, trying to see the big picture. So, realizing that stopping muggers in alleys doesn't really change the world, and we've heard that criticism come up in other comic book series where Justice, which was another DC comic, looked at the idea that, you know, the heroes keep saving us but never really do anything to really change our fate, change the planet's fate, and so the supervillains band together to deliver that promise. And I think that's an interesting idea, where instead of I'm just trying to maintain the status quo, the heroes envision a new world, a better world, a world of peace, and set about trying to achieve that. Now, finally, I mentioned Jay Lee again, precisely because it is his art here in Ozymandias. I mean, it's fantastic in the sense of conveying energy, motion, intensity of the action. But for me, I'm not a huge fan all the time of his faces, of his skin work. I find everyone looks kind of wrinkly, distorted, and I have liked his work when it comes to The Dark Tower, where I feel like distortion is almost part of the world, maybe, is the lens that you see the world through, where given that you're then reading Before Watchmen and you're getting so many different artists' styles, it just makes me kind of think that everybody's kind of gone really wrinkly, and that they don't have their joints in the proper places. So, I did enjoy the story as it was written by Len Wein, I should mention. I was less a fan of Jay Lee's art, and then John Higgins and Steve Rude do the backup feature. So, I'm going to take a break here for a moment, and then be right back to finish off on the other two graphic novels that make the Before Watchmen series. See you in a moment.